Here's the thing that particularly interested me. This whistleblower stated that if you go to the FAA, I'm going to quote her now, if you don't say you fear retaliation during an initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. I think we've got that quote as well. If you don't say you fear retaliation during the initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. Is that accurate? Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower says that when she would go to the FAA with her concerns, these are reports of technical issues, other corner cutting by Boeing, that she often got relegated to an undesirable role. In other words, she was retaliated against. In one example, for instance, she did not receive overtime in her new role, which resulted in a $30,000 pay hit. And this whistleblower alleged Boeing routinely conducts retaliation in this way without raising any formal alarm bells. In other words, tries to retaliate, but sort of on the sly, as it were, and evade any FAA accountability or scrutiny. Are you aware of things like this happening?
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Johnson. Mr. Whitaker, let me start with some press reporting. I've read press claims that managers at both FAA and Boeing often agreed, I'm going to quote now, to table disagreements about technical issues in order to avoid delays, and that the relationship between your agency and Boeing was, quote, almost fraternal, end quote. Does that strike you as accurate in the time that you've been in your position?
Well, in the time that I've been in my position, and particularly since January 5th, that I would not use that to characterize the relationship, no.
Have you found, in looking back at your agency's conduct, are you worried about Boeing employees and FAA regulators being too close, potential conflicts of interest, or otherwise not the sort of rigorous oversight that's necessary being provided?
I think there have been various chapters in that relationship, and I think particularly with the development of the MAX, some of the delegation of authorities that took place, and some of the processes in that era showed some culture problems between the two. So we're very focused on making sure that happens, and we also monitor to make sure we're not having regulatory capture and rotating our inspectors and our executives to ensure that.
Let me ask you about some whistleblower allegations. Since Mr. Calhoun testified here back in June, a number of whistleblowers have contacted my office. One whistleblower told my office that Boeing would routinely try to schedule inspections based on which FAA investigators were coming, because some FAA investigators were known to be more inclined to provide sign-offs. I think we've got a quote about this. When this whistleblower brought this up to Boeing, namely this sort of disparate treatment by different investigators, he was brought into an office and told, don't push and do whatever your career can handle. My question is, does the FAA now, or has it in the past, allow Boeing to schedule which inspections occur with specific investigators for certifying aircraft?
There are various types of inspections. Some of those are large paperwork inspections. Those tend to get scheduled. They're fairly intensive, weeks-long audits. The primary inspection happens on the floor, and particularly now that we have inspectors on the floor. I visited with the inspectors in Charleston and walked the floor with them. They have the opportunity to join the briefing meetings in the morning, the various level of management meetings, but more importantly, engage actually with the employees. So I think in this new regime we've had in place for the last 9 months, we have a much more of an ability to have a spontaneous inspection procedures and get better data that way.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a yes maybe as to paperwork inspections. As to in-person inspections, you are not currently allowing there to be scheduled inspections, is that right?
Those are more spontaneous, and in fact, if an inspector sees something he doesn't like it on the spot, he can say, can I see the paperwork? Can I talk to the person that did this, and effectively go through an inspection at that point.
Has the agency allowed scheduled inspections of any kind in the past?
Just of the audit nature, both with the quality systems for Boeing, which are basically auditing their manuals and procedures, and also similar inspections that happen with suppliers.
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower, a different person, told my office that she would report scores of technical issues, but when she did that, those reports were not well received by Boeing. No surprise given how Boeing has behaved. Here's the thing that particularly interested me. This whistleblower stated that if you go to the FAA, I'm going to quote her now, if you don't say you fear retaliation during an initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. I think we've got that quote as well. If you don't say you fear retaliation during the initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. You get full whistleblower protection with each outreach.
Okay, so the FAA is not requiring whistleblowers to explicitly state that they fear retaliation in order to get whistleblower protection as defined by law. Is that correct?
Sir. Yes, sir.
What are you doing to ensure that any whistleblower who comes forward to you, whether from Boeing or anywhere else, is guaranteed the full whistleblower protections they are entitled to under the statute?
In 2023, we beefed up our department, added a number of inspectors, and they're all very well trained on what the protocols are. And really the key to this system working is having that confidentiality. It is really the cornerstone of the system working. So we encourage people to speak up, and we are bending over backwards to make sure they're protected.
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower says that when she would go to the FAA with her concerns, these are reports of technical issues, other corner cutting by Boeing, that she often got relegated to an undesirable role. In other words, she was retaliated against. In one example, for instance, she did not receive overtime in her new role, which resulted in a $30,000 pay hit. And this whistleblower alleged Boeing routinely conducts retaliation in this way without raising any formal alarm bells. In other words, tries to retaliate, but sort of on the sly, as it were, and evade any FAA accountability or scrutiny. Are you aware of things like this happening?
I'm aware of allegations of retaliation, and it has been a focus as we look at the safety culture change that has to happen. A key part of that is a robust whistleblower program that does not have a retaliation. That's going to involve training of management so they know how to treat employees. And anytime we get an allegation of retaliation, we bring in the Department of Labor and OSHA to investigate as well.
And so has that happened recently? I mean, are you investigating? Have you brought in other relevant federal agencies to investigate possible cases of retaliation as it relates to Boeing?
We routinely would bring in the Department of Labor if there's a retaliation allegation.
You say routinely, but I guess I'm looking for, as it relates to Boeing, while you have been in your role, have there been instances where you've had to go after them for potential retaliation?
I can get that information and provide it to your office.
Okay, that would be helpful. In my time remaining here, let me just ask about something you testified to back in June when you were before the Commerce Committee. You were talking about changing your approach to inspecting Boeing production facilities. But one former FAA official has commented that 150 inspectors is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of work that goes on at a typical Boeing production facility. Boeing says they have 170,000 employees. The Boeing facility in Renton, Washington, for example, where the 737s are produced, has 1 million square feet. How many inspectors do you have on the floor at Renton, for example?
I could give you the precise number. We currently have 11, and by the end of the year, we plan to have 13 inspectors there.
So you have 11 on a floor of 1 million square feet. There are 12,000 employees at Renton. Are those numbers adequate?
Our current assessment is this is a good start, and these inspectors are able to walk the line and talk to employees, and we feel like we're pretty well covered, but we will continue to evaluate that number as we go forward.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Johnson, for allowing me to ask these questions. I just want to say in closing that, listen, what's happened at Boeing is absolutely unacceptable. As I said to the CEO when he was sitting right where you are, for the CEO to have gotten a 45% pay increase as he did year over year while he wasn't paying his machinists out in the Pacific Northwest, while his planes are literally falling out of the sky, is absolutely reprehensible. They are destroying, he is destroying a great American company, and I don't buy this stuff that Boeing has a culture problem. Boeing has a leadership problem, and I just want to make sure, Mr. Whitaker, I'm glad you're doing the job you're doing. I want to make sure your agency is holding their feet to the fire. I worry about these reports that there's this sort of fratty culture between the FAA and Boeing. We need tough oversight there, and we're counting on you to provide that because, frankly, the American public deserve it when they get into an airplane, and the good people who work for Boeing deserve to be protected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, if I could just start with you. You work at a large corporate firm here in town, I think. Is that right?
Yes, Senator.
You, according to the materials you submitted, you have represented, among other clients, the Boeing company since 2013. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
According to the same materials for much of this representation, you served as the primary or the lead counsel for Boeing. Is that correct?
In certain matters, I did.
Is that litigation still ongoing?
No, it is not.
There's a case in particular I want to ask you about. It's a case that featured breach of contract claim, fraud claims, and trade secret claims by a company called Alabama Aircraft Industries. They allege that Boeing stole proprietary information when the two companies were working together on a joint bid for an Air Force contract. Now, a federal jury had already determined that Boeing owed this company $2.1 million for violating the bidding contract and for breaching a non-disclosure agreement. Boeing had previously, in 2006, paid a $615 million settlement to DOJ to settle claims that it had illegally obtained competitors' information with lucrative government contracts. And as I'm sure you're aware, Boeing has been at the center of major concerns about whistleblower retaliation, safety of its planes. In fact, we've heard testimony right here in this committee about all of that. Here's what I'm getting at. Boeing has engaged in corporate behavior in a pattern going back years now that, shall we say, is less than model. Do you have any thoughts about your representation of this company? Any regrets, any concerns?
In my work as an advocate, I have been duty-bound to zealously advocate for my client's best interests, and that is what I have done. As a neutral judge, I am very mindful that my role instead would be to apply faithfully and impartially the law to the specific facts that appear before me, and that is what I would do.
No moral qualms at all?
I believe that it has always been a strength of mine to be able to see the shared humanity in every one of my clients, no matter the issue. And I understand that as a judge, my role would be to fairly and impartially apply the law, no matter the parties or the issue that was before me, and that is what I would do.
Well, shared humanity, this is a corporation though, isn't it? It's one of the biggest corporations in the world.
It is.
And one of the most profitable corporations in the world. I assume you chose to represent them voluntarily. I mean, right? You weren't forced to represent Boeing.
It was the case I was assigned to at my firm.
But you continued to do it. You served as lead counsel, I thought. There's multiple pieces of litigation in which you served as primary lead counsel for Boeing, correct?
There are multiple Boeing matters that I've
Yeah.
handled.
Okay, let me ask you about a different corporation that you've represented, the 3M Corporation, huge multinational conglomerate. In this case, the plaintiff was an individual named Jonathan Vaughn. He was an Iraq War veteran. He alleged that he'd suffered hearing loss stemming from his use of defective earplugs manufactured by your client. Vaughn was awarded $2.2 million in that case. Here's a report from the case. The jury decided that 3M's earplugs were to blame for his current hearing impairment, while also determining the earplugs were unreasonably dangerous, according to the verdict form. 3M misrepresented the quality of the earplugs and was negligent in their design. The report goes on to note that at the time of this verdict, this was the 9th of 15 cases against 3M to go against them in litigation over these earplugs. Just any conclusions or reflections on your involvement in that case?
Senator, I've had a varied practice handling cases that span the spectrum of legal issues and representing a wide range of parties throughout my career. And I believe that the litigation matters and the variation in the work that I have done has given me a very strong and versatile litigation skill set and a comfort in the courtroom that would serve me well were I to be confirmed to be a judge on the D.C. Supreme Court.
Okay, so you're not concerned is what I take from it. I mean, you don't have any regrets about representing either of these corporations in these various matters.
I believe that I have had a strong litigation practice throughout my career.
Well, I heard that part, but I'm just asking if you have any regrets, if you have any qualms. Sounds like you don't, which is fine. I just want to. I mean, obviously you're a very talented person. You've done terrific work. You were made partner at a very early age, so you have a lot of skill. I'm just trying to figure out why you've chosen to use it for these particular clients.
I do not have regrets about my career. I believe that I have developed a strong litigation skill set that would serve me well as a judge.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I have concerns. Obviously, I don't love the representation. These big corporate clients, these huge corporations, they've got so much influence in this capital. They've got so much influence in our economy. They've got probably every law firm in America lined up to represent them. And you know, I just think sometimes we got to ask ourselves, I mean, do these people doing these kind of things or ripping off people like Jonathan Vaughn, I mean, do they really need our representation? Obviously, every client's entitled to a vigorous defense, sure. But we still have to ask ourselves, I'm an attorney myself, we still have to ask ourselves as attorneys, should we be representing them? I mean, do we want to do that? Obviously, it's your judgment, so I'm not suggesting you've done anything wrong. I mean, it's 100% your judgment, and you did your job well. But I have to say, it concerns me a little bit. I'm almost out of time. Mr. McKenzie, I just want to ask you one thing really quickly here before my time expires. You wrote a letter in 2021 asking then Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. I just want to quote you to make sure I get this right. You asked, that's the removal from office provision, the unfitness from office provision of the Constitution. So you urged then VP Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment against then President Trump to declare to the leaders of Congress that the president's unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. You went on to say that then President Trump was unfit for office and a reckless and wanton threat to the Constitution. Does that still reflect your views?
Senator, I do want to correct the record. I didn't write the letter. Along with hundreds of other folks, signed on to the letter because we were concerned about the events of January 6th.
Okay, you signed the letter, though.
Absolutely.
Does that still represent your views?
I signed the letter, Senator. I was concerned about January 6th.
Yeah, and you haven't changed your view at all that the ex-president is unfit for office, a reckless and wanton threat to the Constitution?
Under the Judicial Code of Ethics, if that matter were to come before me, it would be inappropriate for me to state my position at this time. So I'm precluded from stating that position.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out if your views changed. I think you've answered my question. I think your answer is you stand by it. You signed it. You stand by it. Is that fair to say? I'm not trying to get how you rule out a case. On a case. I'm just trying to figure out. You signed a letter. I just want to make sure that you haven't changed your views. I think you've answered my question. I think you said you stand by it. Don't let me put words in your mouth. But is that correct? You signed it. You stand by it. Is that fair to say?
It is correct that I signed the letter.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.